Welcome to Azure Community Live. This is an online meetup about Azure for the community, created by the community. I'm your host, Lars Klint. The idea behind this online meetup is that anyone, anywhere with an internet connection can be part of the Azure community. I myself live in rural Australia and I can't go to meetups in my nearest major city. So this is an opportunity for me to join and give back. And speaking of giving back, if you want to share your passion for Azure or on whatever level, then get in touch with us either via Twitter, YouTube, or the Call for Papers link on our website. It can be on anything Azure at any level. It's totally up to you. Everybody is welcome. So let me get to the speaker for this event. Today we're doing a lunch and learn session of 30 minutes with Janaka Rangama. He is a Microsoft Azure MVP and a Microsoft certified trainer, originally hailing from Sri Lanka, the pearl of the Indian Ocean. He wrote that, not me, but I'm sure it's right. Janaka is a senior principal product technologist at Dell Technologies Azure Stack Family team. He's a well-known speaker in many international conferences and an expert in both Microsoft and OS X technologies. So welcome, Janaka. I should just say that after about 25 minutes, we'll have a Q&A. So if you do have questions, put them in the YouTube questions or the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. So welcome, Janaka, and thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Lars, for the introduction. I'm going to start the screen share now.
Sure. So I will just let Janaka go for it.
Thanks, Lars. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for taking part of this awesome community, Azure Community Live, by Lars and Esteban and a couple of other people behind this, Microsoft MVPs. And like Lars said, it's an honor to be in this show and giving access to everyone who's interested about Azure, wherever in the world you are. That's the mission of the show. And I'm glad to be a speaker in the show. So today's session is about building intelligent edge applications with Microsoft Cloud. And we're going to dig deep bit into what the whole intelligent edge ecosystem within Microsoft Azure, and one case study on how we should implement a regular line of business application, transform it into a cloud native model using the Microsoft Cloud's edge capabilities. All right. Like last mentioned, I'm a Microsoft MVP and a Microsoft MCT. If you're around Azure Kubernetes service, I've written a book with a couple of other MVPs about getting started with AKS. So if you're new to AKS or exploring AKS, might worth to have a look on that. Now, when we say the cloud, Microsoft's version of cloud has two pieces. The public Azure cloud as itself, and all the connected devices into the Microsoft Azure public cloud. Now, the definition for the intelligent cloud is the massively hosted data centers, and they're running those Azure services and all the cloud services they're consuming. And in their words, an intelligent edge ecosystem is a set of connected device systems and devices. So think about the microcontrollers in your fridge, smartwatch, and all the IoT devices you have in your home or office or in your manufacturing hub. All of these devices connected together, sending data out to a public cloud, comprised of this whole intelligent cloud and intelligent edge ecosystem. Now, Microsoft has a large portfolio of products in the ecosystem, public cloud ecosystem. But for the sake of this session, we are focusing on one of those products called the Azure Stack Hub, which I'm going to explain in a later slide. And we're going to see how to build a application framework around Microsoft Azure and Azure Stack Hub to provide hybrid capabilities. When we have a look at the portfolio of products that Azure provides you with the intelligent edge cloud ecosystem, we're starting from the microcontroller level up into the hyperscale cloud, that is the public Azure cloud. There are a few pieces in this puzzle. Now, obviously, Microsoft has announced Azure Sphere, MCU level capability that Microsoft provides for device manufacturers, etc., so they can send the data back to Azure Cloud for processing. Then we have the IoT devices and edge devices like Azure IoT Device SDK, Azure IoT Edge, which will provide the sensors for the interaction with your devices and your data. And then for those scenarios where compute and some sort of compute, I'd say, is required and storage is required, Microsoft has a solution called the Azure Stack Edge, which can provide services like Kubernetes, Azure IoT Edge, just enough services to run your applications in remote locations. Think about mines, think about where remote vessels or foreign missions where there's just enough compute is required. Now, next piece of the puzzle would be providing full Azure services on a customer's data center or a central location with or without connection to the public Azure, but on that premises hardware itself. That's where the Azure Stack Hub comes in. So the definition for Azure Stack Hub, or the general idea about Azure Stack Hub, is it's an extension of Microsoft Azure which can be deployed on premises. So it's think of it like a big server rack sitting in your data center, but it provides the exact same Azure services for you. And then you can connect all of these with the public Azure if you're looking at a hybrid scenario. So the full spectrum of cloud and edge form factors includes all these solutions. What is hybrid, or what is edge? Now, when we talk about hybrid and edge, people are thinking like, I have few components deployed already. Can I use them? For an example, a lot of people are using on-premises Active Directory, and they still have on-premises infrastructure, and they're using on-prem SQL servers and all the other services. Now, when you see the ecosystem Microsoft has built around hybrid, it is designed in a way that you can use it with Azure and Azure Stack Hub and all the other products in the portfolio. For an example, for identity management, you have Azure Active Directory for Microsoft Azure. You can use the same identity with Azure Stack as well. You can use the same tooling that you use to manage your virtual machines and the ecosystem. You have the Azure Data Services. Then you have your Azure PaaS services and SaaS services, which you can combine with Azure Stack and Azure. Why Azure Stack Hub? Now, people say, okay, hold on a second. We have the public Azure cloud. Why do I go and buy another product that is hardware based? What's the use case for it? Do people ever need it? Now, if you take customers in healthcare, government, or any other customer or organization who requires the Azure services as they are today, but have data privacy and restrictions around where they operate, Azure Stack Hub is a solution. Reason being, it is a completely autonomous cloud that can or cannot be be isolated from public Azure itself, but provide the same services, and it provides the same application model. For an example, if you're using Azure DevOps to deploy your services to public Azure, it's just a matter of changing the target to Azure Stack to deploy it. The code is same, and you'll be using the same ARM templates, you'll be using the same other scripting languages, same programming languages, experience is same. And it provides the same Azure services and the Azure Marketplace. So for the user of the Azure Stack Hub, it is just an Azure cloud sitting on your data center. And this is not just DIY hardware. So it is an cloud inspired hyperconverged system provided by major hardware providers like my employer and a few others. So from a hardware perspective, it's serviced, and maintained by those hardware providers. And as a user, you're managing the Azure persona of that cloud. Why we're using it? For scenarios like edge and disconnected, mines, foreign missions, oil rigs, maybe completely isolated, maybe semi-permanent, can be done. Regulatory and data sovereignty requirements, government customers or diplomatic missions, things like that. And if you're looking for an application modernization platform, for an example, you want to go to Azure, but you are on a very legacy hardware, but you don't have the skills to migrate to Azure at once, you can start with Azure Stack, build your applications, transform them into Azure Stack, slowly move from Azure Stack to the public cloud, keep whatever you want to um, uh, have on premises on the Azure Stack instance. Now, without further ado, let's take a traditional case study of an n-tier application to a cloud native architecture, but deploying that on an edge situation where Azure Stack Hub is leveraged. Now, I'm taking a hypothetical customer called the Contoso Financial. Their headquarters in Dallas, Texas, and they are a company who does residential mortgage business. So their entire business is dependent on mortgage applications. So they have a strategy to move to a cloud first model, but the problem they are having is they are running on a legacy hardware, pretty much on virtual machines, and the skill set and the ever-growing customer demand requires them to go to a PaaS model in a public cloud. Okay, but one of the primary applications they're using is their consumer-facing mortgage application. Customer comes in, puts in their details, and apply for a mortgage, right? And this information is required for the new application processing, and if a customer wants to access their current mortgage information. Now, the current system is hosted in one of the data centers running on VMware, and what they're using is IIS, and they're using Windows services for the application tier and Microsoft Message Queue for messaging between the tiers, and using SQL Server 2012 database. So it's a typical n-tier application. The challenge they are having is this is on the lease, so they want to make sure that if they're investing on another hardware product, it has a proper lifecycle management system, and they're looking at modernizing the application itself to be Azure consistent, and they want to use a singular method for CI/CD deployments, and they want to make sure that whatever the instances they can put in the public cloud can be put in public cloud, but whatever the instance they have to put in their own data center should reside on their own data center. Now, with a customer of this type, there are few obligations and objections coming in. So for an example, the database that is hosting the mortgage information, that's financial data and it's sensitive. So it cannot be hosted in someone else's data center. Now, they don't have the skills or the people to do day-to-day management stuff, and having the same skill set and doing less administrative work is required. Now, they are on a VM model, they are on an n-tier model, but they want to move into PaaS. So how do they do that? And they want to use automated deployments and application development tools that is available. Can Azure Stack do that? They are the current objections they had. Now, the current state of this application, like I mentioned, is quite simple. You have web servers, app servers, you have message queue, and you have a backend database hosted in Dallas, Texas, in a service provider's data center. Now, in order to design an ideal solution, they need to have a hybrid model to host the public-facing side of things in Azure, and whatever that needs to be isolated, they can bring down to Azure Stack. There are a few ways to do it. We'll look at one model of architecture that they have designed to go ahead with the situation like this. So their mortgage processing application, what they can do here is the whole data piece, they can host on an Azure Stack SQL database sitting on their data center, sitting on an Azure Stack appliance, on an Azure Stack subscription, and they can have the mortgage application, mortgage administration application on Azure Web App, and they can use Azure API apps to provide the business logic and a couple of Azure functions to provide further business logic. But when they want to expand to a different region, for an example, if they want to deploy this into South Central, right? That may be in US, or if they want to go to a different country like Brazil or somewhere, they can easily extend this deployment model by creating a VPN or direct connection with ExpressRoute and deploy a different version of the application in the public cloud. But the data will be always written to the instance that is in the Dallas data center. And if there is a requirement to have the data separated from the country itself, for an example, if it's an application for Argentina and they want to do it in that country itself, another instance of the application can be deployed in another Azure Stack instance in Argentina, and they can have a database sync in between if it is required, or can be isolated at all. So they can use, these applications they put, it can be scanned or it can be typed, but if they're looking at an alternative method, maybe they can use to store them as PDFs, but they can use as a blob storage to store those PDFs. Obviously, they can use a OCR application to retrieve the data. And they can use Azure Queue Storage for the application's messaging requirement. And finally, if they want to provide a unified URLs for the customers to reach out to, for an example, mortgage.contoso.com or something like that, they can have that URL associated with something called the Azure Traffic Manager, which will see where this request came in. For an example, if it came from Brazil or Argentina, they can always redirect that to a local instance running in that country or that region. Or if it's load balancing, they can use that traffic manager to load balance between a couple of instances. So load balancing is pretty much load balancing the application is pretty much according to the model they require. And if they want to further improve this application, what they can ideally do is they can put down things like CDN, so that the file processing or the file retrieval at the front can be expedited. But what matters here is what's important in this architecture is now Contoso is not relying entirely on virtual machine. So if you look at all the services mentioned in this architecture, they are all Azure PaaS services. Some of them are running on Azure Public. Some of them are running on Azure Stack, in an Azure Stack instance in their own data center. Now, what about the challenges they had with maintenance? So what they can do is they can have the existing ISV to install and configure Azure Stack for them, where the hardware partner is doing the maintenance work for the hardware and administering the Azure Stack instance itself. We call it as the role is called as the cloud operator role. So for an example, when you perform something on Azure, for an example, if you spin up a virtual machine or AKS cluster and all, there are underlying management tasks that needs to be done, support and all this stuff. So that role that Microsoft performs in public Azure is the Azure Stack operator when it comes to Azure Stack Hub. So there's got to be someone who's doing the maintenance work, for an example, patching and updating the Azure Stack instance, installing resource providers which provides the capabilities that you require. So that Azure cloud operator role can be fulfilled by the existing ISP, whereas the customers, the end customers, or the Contoso Financial developers will have access to the Azure subscriptions that is provided to them based on their access levels granted by Azure RBAC. So in that case, the requirement on staff is completed. And the other thing is using the tooling. Now, to deploy this entire application, for an example, to deploy it into multiple instances, they might have been using different source control system. They might be using different deployment methods. But since all these services are Azure natives and work well with Azure DevOps, they can definitely use Azure DevOps pipelines, boards, and all these other technologies to deploy to public Azure or to Azure Stack. Doesn't matter where they want to host it. couple of other challenges they had was, the data sovereignty, which is fulfilled by hosting the data on the Azure Stack instance itself. But the difference there is the same data, same services to retrieve the data they're going to use as it were to be hosted in public Azure. But in this case, it is running on their own data center. So all in all, this company can turn their target architecture from NTIA to cloud native just in Azure. And for their compliance requirement, they can host the entire instance on Azure Stack Hub. Now, there are a couple of other scenarios where a company like this could potentially look at. For an example, if they are looking at providing a end application to a very remote country or region, possibly they can change the application model to run entirely on a Kubernetes cluster and deploy that application front end and the logic to Azure Stack Edge device. It's just a single server and appliance running and hosted in a branch office or somewhere with less access. For an example, there are countries which have minimum access to internet, or they still need to do in-person lodging or whatever. So in case if there's such a situation, they can have something like the Edge appliance deployed into a branch office. People could come in, submit the application by post or print out, scan it, upload to the application, goes through the same channel, and can be processed at a local Azure Stack instance or in public cloud. Depends on how you're going to deploy. So the key messaging behind using Azure Stack Hub combined with Azure is, if you have disconnected scenarios, compliance requirements, and modernization requirements that limits you to use anything that you want to use in Azure in your own data center, and you have to consume that in your own data center, Azure Stack Hub is the answer. So with that was pretty much it. I hope that you have learned something from this particular session. And if you have any questions around, Azure Stack Hub or other Edge products that Microsoft is offering, you can always reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn, and happy to assist with that. Thank you. Over to you, Lars.
Thanks very much, Janaka. That was actually quite interesting. It's always tricky doing these lunchtime sessions that are short. Funny how that works. The shorter the presentation, the harder it is to get all the stuff in that you would like to talk about. So we didn't have any questions on the chat, but I did have one question. I thought, have you got any examples of when not to use Azure Stack? Because it sounds like it solves an awful lot of problems, especially around data sovereignty and governance and all those issues.
Yep.
Have you seen examples where you go, hey, no, hang on, this is not the right way to use it, just so we have that side of it as well?
Yeah, it's quite not it's quite straightforward, but it's one fact that people always miss. Now, I've seen customers and people who say, oh, okay, I want to go with Azure Stack. But if you look at their requirement might be to purely use virtualized infrastructure. So one instance of not using Azure Stack is if you want to just replace your VMware or Hyper-V requirement environment with Azure Stack, that's not the intended use case. Yes, you can run virtual machines on Azure Stack, but they are Azure virtual machines. So if you want 123.5 RAM and 2.5 cores, 3 cores or whatever, if it's not an Azure SKU, you're not going to get it, right? So another instance of not using Azure Stack would be, I've seen people going to Azure Stack to consume IO intensive workload. So for an example, they have a OLTP processing, which is running on raw hardware or virtual hardware. They want to use Azure Stack. I'm like, no, hang on. You want the raw, so how about using Azure Stack as the presentation layer? So for an example, if they want to have high performance SQL databases as a service, they can still have the regular SQL backend that is running on VMware, Hyper-V, or physical servers, present that through Azure Stack. so that you can get the highest queues of the Azure Stack SQL databases
Yep.
where you don't really manage it. But your database admins, your system admins will still have a job. They will still manage in that physical environment,
Hmm.
but the absorption or the service itself for the developers and the users is a a software so platform as a service offering
Hmm.
from your company itself.
Uh-huh.
Another instance that I wouldn't recommend Azure Stack would be if you are looking at very high compute intensive workloads, for an example, like Azure Machine Learning or something like that. Um, like I said, Azure Stack is an extension of Azure. So it's running on your data center. So there's a limit to the capacity you can go on, right? So that means for a high compute intensive workload, this is not the solution. Some of those services are not
Sure.
available on Azure Stack. For an
Uh-huh.
example, Azure Machine Learning, that's a good example. Some people want to run SAP on Azure Stack, which is not certified yet.
Hmm.
So these are the scenarios that I would generally exclude. But think about the possibility. Right now, Azure Stack is a single appliance, so it's like a single Azure region. Microsoft is planning to introduce more capacity, like multiple Azure Stack in the same region, and next level would be multiple regions. When we come to that level, right, that means you are providing the same hyperscale capability that Microsoft provides in your own data centers. At that point, yes, it might be a possibility to run SAP, but we may never know.
Yeah, right. That's fair. And then from all this, obviously, it sounds like you can really get in trouble. Not only if you want to, use hardware that doesn't exist as an Azure SKU or SKU, but what about pricing? Is this comparable to Azure pricing, or how does that work?
Okay, so obviously, since it's an appliance, you pay an upfront amount, which is significant to the hardware provider. So that means this is not really for retail customers. So
Hmm.
for enterprise customers, they pay the hardware price for the hardware provider, and the Azure Stack software is free. What
Okay.
you pay is for the consumption. So for an example, if you pay like $100 to run a certain virtual machine on Azure, if you're running that on Azure Stack, you would be paying somewhere like $10. These are not exact figure,
Sure, sure.
quite less amount of dollar figures to run that on Azure Stack. So when you use that model, you have two ways of doing it. You can either report back your usage with to your Azure subscription. For an example, that $10 would be charged from your Azure subscription,
Sure.
or you can use a SPLA model where you report your usage like core-based licensing, the same on-prem licensing model you have, and that would be for an Azure Stack disconnected environment. For an example, a customer who doesn't need this consumption and everything going to public cloud, so basically isolated. For government customers, military, that's an example. Two
Okay.
pricing models: pay as you go with Azure Cloud, or pay for what you're using with this existing software licensing model you have with Microsoft.
For sure. No, that makes sense. So I think we're going to end it there. I'm just going to say that if you want to know more about Azure, we have two upcoming Azure Community Live events. There's one on the March 23rd at 8 o'clock or 20, 2000 hours, whatever you call it, in Europe, CET, so Central European Time. And that's with Pascal Nauber talking about a full introduction to AKS, Azure Kubernetes Services. So that sounds pretty interesting. And then the day after, at the same time, 8 p.m. Central European Time, we have Alessandra Vodza talking about all you want to know about Azure Kubernetes Services security. So we have two AKS talks coming up in the next few days. So if you want to jump on those, that will be on the same YouTube channel, same bet link, all that. But we'll make sure that you know about them as well. So thank you so much, Janaka, for doing this lunch and learn session. This is our first test, and I hope that everybody got something out of it.
Thanks for having me, love. Thanks, guys, and have a great rest of your day. Thank
See ya.
you.